What's going on, everybody? I'm Johnny Brook. Welcome back to another Crafted Workshop video, and this week I have another kind of different project. So this is Dylan and Molly from the Wood Brew channel. Hopefully you guys are already familiar with them. They do all kinds of cool woodworking projects, but they're kind of tricking out their little Ford Transit Connect van, and this week we worked on building this little modular kitchen setup to go in this kind of storage system they have beneath their bed and kind of couch area. So in this section you've got kind of your stove as well as some storage down here in this little drawer for utensils and plates and that kind of thing. And then back here you have a bit of a sink so you can wash food and utensils, and then there's even more storage in this compartment below the sink. So it's a pretty cool setup. You can also take both of these boxes away in case you want to use them on a picnic table or something like that, but it turned out really cool. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the project. The first thing we worked on was building this slide out tray that the kitchen boxes ride on, and that build is covered in a video on the Wood Brew channel, which I'll link to below. Once the tray was done, we could get to work on the boxes. We used 1/2-inch Baltic Birch plywood on this project, which comes in 5x5 foot sheets, meaning it's a heck of a lot easier to work with than standard 4x8 sheets. After ripping a few strips, I cross-cut the pieces to size using my crosscut sled, and some of the pieces needed to be cut to final length, which I did over the miter saw. And we just kept repeating these steps until we had all of our parts, and then we could move on to assembly. Before assembling the parts, we hit the inside faces of the pieces with 180 grit sandpaper, just to avoid having to sand inside the boxes after assembly. To assemble the boxes, we first tacked the pieces in place with 1-inch brad nails and glue, and then reinforced the joints with these trim head screws, which I'll link to in the video description below. These small heads are really clean looking and are easy to fill with wood filler if that's the look you're going for. The first box we assembled was the utensil drawer, but before assembling the main boxes, I wanted to make them a little extra fancy with some CNC cut handles. I modeled up the cutout in Easel, which is Inventable's free software that goes along with their CNC machines, and I kind of based the design on Frank Howarth's handle design that he's used in the past. After modeling, we moved out to the X-Carve and got to cutting, which went really quickly. To make sure the handles matched perfectly on each end of the boxes, we stacked both ends of each box during each carving session, but this meant we couldn't use tabs to hold down the cutout pieces since the top piece of plywood wouldn't have had tabs. Instead, we just cleared the entire pocket instead of doing a cutout, and this only took about 20 minutes per set of handles. To clean up the fuzzy edges and make the handles a little bit more comfortable, I chamfered the edges at the router table and then hand sanded all the surfaces before assembly. Assembly was the same as before, tacking the pieces in place with glue and brad nails, and then reinforcing with screws. And this box with the drawer actually only had 3 sides, so that the front would be open for using that propane stove, and it also has a divider in the middle to box in the drawer. To add this divider, we marked lines on the outside of the box where we should drive the screws, then added the drawer plus some 1/8-inch spacers, then placed the divider on top. Then reinforced the divider with screws on all 3 sides. The box for the sink was just another standard box, so we can kind of skim over that, but while we're assembling, let's talk about the sponsor of this week's video, Rockler Woodworking and Hardware. I used a ton of Rockler products during this build, including their crosscut sled, glue brush kit, bench cookies, and self-centering drill bit, and I'll have links to all the items I used in the video description below. Rockler's got tons of great tools and accessories for your next build, and they're always coming up with new and innovative ideas to help make your woodworking more efficient and more enjoyable. Thanks again to Rockler for sponsoring this week's build. Once the sink box was assembled, we could cut the lid to size based on the final size of the box, and we made the lid about a 1/16 of an inch smaller lengthwise and widthwise to allow for easy removal of the lid, but also to minimize any rattling when driving around the van. We tacked in some plywood strips to serve as lid supports, and these hold the lid in place, flush with the top edge of the box walls, but also allow the lid to easily be removed to get at anything stored inside the box. The sink we used is actually a stainless steel mixing bowl, but it ended up being the perfect size for this application. If Dylan and Molly want to add a drain later, they can easily drill a hole in the bottom of the bowl since it has a flat bottom, and then run some tubing out of the back of the box, but really it's just as easy to dump the sink contents when you're done using it. We cut out the hole for the sink using the jigsaw, as it really doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to hold the sink. And Dylan and Molly are going to go back and add some foam gasket strips to the inside of the cutout just to hold the bowl in place a little more snugly, again to avoid any rattling while driving. Next, we prep for finish by filling some of the screw holes with wood filler, sanding the boxes, and breaking any of the sharp edges. For the finish, we just applied a few coats of spray lacquer, sanding between coats. Once the finish dried, we worked on a simple pull for the utensil drawer and decided to use some of the leather scraps I had lying around to make a quick pull. I cut the piece to size using a rotary cutter, nipped off the corners, and then punched a hole at each end where the screw would thread through. We attached the pull to the front of the drawer with small screws and these finish washers, which really gives the handle a clean, finished look. I'm definitely planning on using this style of drawer pull again in the future. I just really like the look, especially against a material like plywood. The last piece to add was a little strip of aluminum to the front of the pull-out tray to keep the boxes in place when pulling out the tray. I cut the aluminum with my portaband, but you can cut aluminum with pretty much any kind of wood cutting saw. Then I rounded the edges and drilled and countersunk a few holes over the drill press. To install the strip, I pre-drilled the holes using a self-centering drill bit and then added a few screws. And you can see by adding this strip, you can actually use the handle cutout on the front of the box to pull out the whole tray, no extra pull required. Finally, we added some grippy pads to the bottom of the two boxes, just to keep them in place while driving, and then this project was done. All right, hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. This was a really fun project. I'm really kind of digging working on these van projects. They really make you kind of think out of the box and come up with unique solutions to problems. I think the way we handled a lot of the pulls with the leather and then also the CNC cut pulls turned out really cool. Even just the little grippy pads on the bottom of these boxes to keep them in place. There's just a lot of things to think through, and I think these turned out really clean and great looking. I'd like to say a big shout out to both of the sponsors of this week's video, Rockler and Inventables. Without my sponsors, I could not do what I do, so hopefully you guys can go support them. Also, I'll have a list of all the tools and materials I use in the video description below. Also, while you're in the video description, check out the link to Dylan and Molly's video on building these sliding trays, as well as the rest of their van content. And last, I have added that YouTube sponsor functionality if you guys want to check that out. I've got exclusive content every month, including vlogs, live streams, that kind of thing, and you guys can help to support me, so I'll have a link to that in the video description as well as on the screen. So thanks again for watching, everybody, and until next week, happy building.